Good afternoon. State law requires the executive, allows the executive to produce what's called the EBR, the Executive Budget Recommendation. Now, the executive has had a busy couple of weeks. In 21 days, we've had an installation as governor, as we were inaugurated into this job. We had a State of the State address, and weather cooperated for one brief evening, so there we were. Now, the EBR. I'm going to, as briefly as I can, describe to you where I believe we are in this budget process, asking you to remember that this is what it says. It is a recommendation. These things will change. The good thing about where I find myself with many friends in the legislature and here in the leadership is we look forward to better ideas. We begin here in the executive branch with a recommendation that we think will do several things. Stating the obvious, no new taxes. It is a pledge and a recommendation that I have made since I began running. We will spend no more money than we're bringing in. As I traveled all over the state of Mississippi, I said, you know, people in Mississippi understand one thing. Don't spend more money than you have. So we're going to have a balanced budget with this CBR. We're going to ask to maintain the 98% rule. Now, I know I was lieutenant governor. We often passed a bill that would set that aside, spend 100% of the revenue. Well, I'm going to ask one or two things of this legislature. I'm going to say either institute the 98% rule and only spend 98% of the revenue, or set aside $100 million out of the $280 million in reserve. I'm willing to take either one. I think the EBR recommendation of only spending 98% is a better opportunity. You see, we learned discipline. That 98% rule was put into effect back in the 1990s when I was here. Tim Ford and Kirk Fordyce worked together to build this so that we might have some reserves in times in which we might be too optimistic in our spending. This budget is a balanced budget of $5.49 billion. Quite a bit of money. 98% of that is $4.56 billion. We use $274.3 million out of our reserves. Let me tell you where that comes from. As you know, we had an unanticipated beginning cash balance. That's money that lapsed over from last year. So we've got about $43.9 million. Our health care trust fund. Now, I think years ago it stopped being actually defined as a trust fund where we were only spending the interest in it. We've been spending money slowly out of that health care trust fund for years. My predecessor, Governor Barber's, recommended that we finally end that process and spend those monies in that trust fund. I agree with him. Working Cash Stabilization Fund, $99.6 million. We commonly refer to that as the Rainy Day Fund. I'm so proud to say the first year I was Lieutenant Governor, we filled that Rainy Day Fund. It was not easy. We worked hard to put aside revenues to put almost $400 million in that fund. Each year we've used it slowly, methodically, as best we could with the leadership of the legislature. There were those that wanted to spend it all the first and second year. Oh, they would say, it's raining now. We would say, please don't do that. It is going to be worse. There's going to be heavier weather. Times will come we will need it. The time has certainly come for the Rainy Day Fund. The Capital Expense Fund, that's a new idea, I believe. Part of that is Chairman Johnny Stringer put into place when he said, you know, we need to stop bonding all of the repairs. And so we're going to say that some of the money that lapses over each year, a portion of it will go into the Capital Expense Fund. And out of those savings, we're going to have about $2 million of that will go for emergency building projects, emergency building repairs. Hurricane disaster funds. This has been a discussion since Katrina. How much is in the fund? How much can we spend? Now we believe that $23.3 million out of that fund can be spent. That will leave $5 million in that fund for de-obligations. I used to say the obligations of those terrible things that the federal government does when we have a disagreement. I even referred at times as Diablo, the devil, and that's what it seemed like. We were going to have a devil at the time when the federal government came down and de-obligated. Some folks here in the Mississippi Gulf Coast have heard that word before. So we got to have that $5 million if the federal government would come down to Waveland or to Kiel or to Pearlington or to those areas and say, now we disagree with the spending after these many years and we're going to ask you to pay it back. 2.5% of that would be the state responsibility, so we save $5 million. So, how do we manage it? Well, as you might suppose, there are going to be cuts to state agencies, about 5.53%. Now, I remember when I was state auditor and the first cuts began to come down about the second or third year Governor Marble was in office. And my chief of staff came in and said, I've got good news and bad news. We'll tell them the good news first. Good news is we're only going to have to cut 5%. See, we thought the bad news was going to be 10%. So the good news was it's only 5%. But he said we had already budgeted for 10%. We were going to be able to take that cut. Now, I know the state auditor will tell you that when I left there as state auditor, there wasn't a lot left to cut. I was very frugal in that. He's done a remarkable job, as has all these state agencies. How do we ask state agencies that have been in such difficult positions to take another 5.53% cut? You've got to give them some flexibility. This budget is going to recommend some reforms. Lump sum budgeting. When these statewide elected officials are elected, the people of the state of Mississippi say, we trust you to go and run your agency. We trust the Secretary of State. We trust the Treasurer. We trust the Attorney General. We trust the Auditor, the other elected officials to go in and manage that agency. So I'm saying to the legislature, let them do that. Determine what we believe to be their actual budget. Give them that lump sum and allow them to manage. What we do now in the legislature, we make you go into categories like salary and travel and commodities and contractual services and equipment. And we help you decide how much you're going to get in each one of those categories. I trust agency directors. I trust elected officials. Give them lump sum. Secondly, they need to be removed from the State Personnel Board guidelines. I know this is not going to be easy. We passed it twice in the Mississippi Senate. It's been passed before, Department of Corrections. Commissioner Elks is here. He saved cumulatively over $100 million since this began in FY05 at the Department of Corrections to right-size those agencies. I know no one wants to lose their job, but these are difficult times. And when executive agency heads and elected officials have to make those decisions, I can tell you what will happen. Lawsuits will ensue. Now, I'm not saying that's the only reason, but again, I'm telling you that they have to have that flexibility if we're going to ask them to manage. Now, there will be some agencies that will receive level funding, so they will not be cut. One will be the Department of Military, our National Guard, Veteran Affairs Board, Mississippi Highway Patrol, Law Enforcement Training Academy, District Attorneys, Student Financial Aid. That's the MTAG so many students depend upon. Department of Corrections. Again, Department of Corrections has done a remarkable job under the most difficult of circumstances. We will fully fund the National Board Certified Teachers, and we will spend $434 million on debt services. $434 million. Of course, we have to pay down our debt. You see, the old way we used to do this, we'd underfund the debt. And then we would come out and say, oh, we have a balanced budget here in the legislature. And then when we would have to make those payments, the governor would have to make cuts and we'd blame him. Oh, yeah, I fully funded you, they would say. You know, the governor cut you. You know, he hates children. Let's don't do that anymore. I'm going to say some things today that are going to be new and radical, but reform, transformational government is what we must have if we're meet the demands brought upon us by the Great Recession. Medicaid will be fully funded. I will talk just a moment about reforms there and flexibilities that we must have. Smaller cuts will be made at MDA. The job creators will take a cut of 3%. I hated to do that, but I'm trying to be as fair and equitable as I can. DHS, we will pay another $16.7 million for the Olivia Y lawsuit mandated by law. Department of Revenue. You see, when I was in business for 16 years, I looked at my expenditures, but I also looked at my revenue. In fact, the people I worked for looked for my revenue. They wanted to know how much I was producing, and if you didn't produce a certain amount for the company, someone would come and see you, and after the third visit, you would have to turn in your car keys. I never did. I always made projected revenue. So we're going to turn to our revenue producer, and we're going to say we're going to give you some additional personnel. We're going to give you some additional auditors. Now, the head of the Department of Revenue has sent a letter saying if I believe I can produce $10 million. If I can spend $5 million on those hiring additional auditors, I can generate another $5 million. And if I don't, I'll leave this office. I didn't accept that deal. I didn't want to fire him. He's doing a good job here. But he's so certain that he can generate revenue. In fact, he thinks he can generate more than that simply by doing the audit for people that are not paying their taxes. I believe all of us in this room are paying ours. Sure pay mine. Everyone else ought to be expected to do so. The governor's office is going to take a larger cut. The office of the governor will take a 6.5% cut. I'm going to lead by example. We're going to do some other things to make sure that we reduce the cost. We plan on selling the citation. We've got 2 airplanes that are available for the executive department. One is a citation, one's a King Air. Now, I'm not trying to make a political statement. I'm trying to run this like a business. If I owned a business just now, a little bit of applause back there, never heard anybody. Hey, Johnny. There you go. Johnny String and I have talked about this. If I owned a business, I would be leasing a plane. Or, you know, if it's not time sensitive, I don't mind flying on Delta or Southwest or someone else. I do it quite often, and it's comfortable, and I get to meet a lot of great people. Our congressmen fly back and forth to Washington on commercial flights all the time. There are other businessmen in this state. I just believe if I call them and I'd say, I've got a prospect in California and I need to get there, and I know you've got a nice airplane, why don't you go with me? I would believe they'd say, we'll be there right away. So, that's $2 million that we'll be able to put. It's one-time money, of course. We believe the plane's worth $2 million. Don't worry. I'm going to get around. And when I need to fly, that King Air is the best plane made. So we believe we need to do that to show how important it is that we're managing this like a budget. Education. You know, education's been a priority. I've long tried to do it, but I try to do it in a reasonable way. Funding MAEP. If we look at funding MAEP, level funding, plus high growth districts, and I've requested that we add, and I'll talk more about that in just a moment, the high growth districts where those kids, those parents are moving in and they're growing by leaps and bounds so that we can help fund that. We cut that out last year. I believe if these numbers are correct, we're going to look at about a $1.95 billion expenditure in MAEP in a high growth district. Now, I'm going to ask school districts to help me. I wish I had it all, but I just don't. I'm going to spend, as we said earlier, most of our reserves, so I'm going to ask school districts to help me by including $72.9 million of their reserves. Now, I know there's a great debate about this, and I understand as auditor what the reserves look like in June and what they look like in December. And if we can do better, we can fix this. But I'm saying if the school districts will join me, if I'll be able to put in some additional money, $6 million in the Emergency Building Loan Fund for those districts that might not have the money. So we're going to have a bridge fund there to help them. We're going to grow the high growth districts by $5.7 million. So that a lot of that money from the local districts will be coming from these high growth districts. So we're going to help them there. 24.45 in the National Board of Certified Teachers. I just have a philosophy, and I think y'all heard it the other day, to get the best teachers in the classrooms, to spend our money in classrooms and not offices. To do that, we need to get nationally board certified teachers. We need Teach for America. I'm going to recommend and suggest that we fund that at $12 million. I fell in love with this program when I went to a KIPP school. It's a charter school, don't panic, but as I went in there and saw those dedicated teachers, I asked the headmaster, the principal there, where do you get these teachers? And he said, Teach for America. They come from Harvard and Yale, and they're in different disciplines, and they came there to Helena, West Helena, Arkansas to teach in a high school. I think we've got to concentrate on getting the best teachers. Now, I've recommended a plan also where we consolidate administrative services, where each county only has one administrative office. I think if we'll do that, we can save money in the future. And there are some good things that will be coming. As I said, we'll add another $27 million under the EBR to education. We will look at community colleges and ask them to take that same cut. This pains me greatly. I know how difficult it is for community colleges now that are growing so fast. But you see, I can't find anywhere else to gather this money. There is no magic formula to say only these areas can be cut. Now, what we are doing today, I met with the Executive Director of the Employment Security Commission, and we're trying to determine if our WIN jobs, our WET fund, our wet force training funds, can be utilized to help with those funding of the workforce development, children, and the dual enrollment. And I just believe we're going to be able to find a way where we can use some of that workforce training money to help with the community colleges. It is my great desire that we do that. IHL is the same way. Again, we're funding the financial aid at level funding, $26.9 million. I will tell you, community colleges reserves look like about $178.6 million. IHL, $428 million. Again, our reserves will be about $7 million following this EBR. Why the cuts? We spend about $26 million less in this budget than in 12. 13 budget is 5.49. The 12 budget was 5.52, about $26 million. But that was one-time money. Along with that, we're going to cut out a total of $168 million of one-time money for reoccurring expenses. This is a hard and difficult decision to make. But here's where we find ourselves. We continue to use one-time money, and again, the bill comes due. Sooner or later, and I think this is the later, we're going to run out of that one-time money. Now, as we look at some of the requirements of debt services, $50 million, 16.7 a week, Olivia Y. Chickasaw interest, again, mandated 3.75. We must pay all of those. We also must look at what I say is the elephant in the phone booth. It's bigger than an elephant in a room. It's Medicaid. CMS, the Center for Medicaid and Medicare Services, tells us that Medicaid recipients will grow in Mississippi by 1%. When I heard that, I thought that doesn't sound too bad, 6.4 to 7.4%. That's over $100 million to the state. You see, our LMAP, the matching funds, have gone up another 0.75%. So over $100 million will be required of the state match for Medicaid. Over 30,000 new Medicaid recipients. Let that soak in for a moment. So you see why we're asking for cuts. You see why we've had to make these decisions. Tough decisions. Now, where would we find $100 million? Well, there's a couple of options. We could take it out of everyone else's budgets. We could take it out of MAEP, community colleges, and IHL, and all of those, and you would see those cuts go up to 12-15%. Or we can do something that's been recommended by peer. We can use what's called the Patient Refined Diagnostic Groups, the APR-DRG. I know we have an acronym for so many things. And I'm not going to tell you I'm an expert on this, but I will tell you the DRGs, this particular form, are the same type that is used by Medicare. It is the same type that's used by Blue Cross Blue Shield. It is the same method for billing that is used in 34 other states. Basically what it says is a schedule will be established by Medicaid for payments of procedures equally across the board. Whatever procedure is done in Hospital A will be the same amount of payment for Hospital B or Hospital C. Now, I'm not trying to harm anyone. I'm not trying to effect cuts on any businesses, and that's exactly what hospitals are. But I've got to try to find $100 million that has been put upon us by no choice of our own. 36,000 Mississippians will need and will be qualified for Medicaid. That's the cold, blunt reality. And it's not going to stop this year. That's why we need another $100 million in our reserve funds for next year. CMC and others say, I have this information, that if the health care plan under the Obama administration is fully implemented, by 2014, some 400,000 Mississippians could be added to the Medicaid fund. 400,000. Now, of course, they say the federal government's going to pay for the first 2 years. Trust us, they say. We're from the government. Ladies and gentlemen, legislators that are here, I'll tell you, this is the most challenging budget that I've ever seen for any governor or any legislature. Now, I've been here dealing with budgets since 1992. This is the most challenging. Now is the time that we will decide, can we manage our budget, or we will shirk from the responsibilities of the hard decisions. I have made them here at the EPR. I'm not closed to the possibility that we can do more. As I looked at APR DRG, I wanted to know, were there others that thought it would work? And as I said, no less authority than the peer committee in this report, and December the 8th of 2009 says, peer concludes that the state should adopt the APR DRG inpatient hospital services payment. Peer says we should do that. If you can find a better way, bright men and women of the legislature, I am open to those recommendations. This is not a rigid, firm, unyielding position that I take. This is the best recommendation of a hard-working, dedicated staff and executive directors of these agencies. They've had little sleep this week. None of us have, but that's all right. This is the business of the people. We are here today so that the average taxpayers of the state of Mississippi can come into this room and hear this report, so that agency heads and executive directors can make their own decisions. I believe there could be a better way, and we will seek out that better way. Just now, I'm being told that in January, we're $23 million above projections. That means we took in $23 million more in January than we had projected. That's a very good indicator. Now, what February and March might look like, we have no idea of knowing. But if they follow that trend, you see this EBR could change. Certainly, we might have another $50 or $60 million. I don't want to get you excited. I don't want to tell you that's a possibility. I have to deal with the most difficult possibilities, or make difficult cuts in the future. I'm going to give you honest numbers. We're not going to raise taxes. We're going to have money set aside in a rainy day fund or reserve. We're going to ask for flexibility for state agencies. We're going to talk about innovative ways to deal with Medicaid in the future. And we're going to listen. Now, in the past, all of us have used the budget for political purposes, to try to hurt one person or the other, or try to make them look bad, or try to say that they don't like this or they don't like that. There's a great deal of consternation and anger. I just came through the appropriations chairman's office. He's got a job ahead of him. I have full confidence in both the appropriations chairman of the House and Senate. Let us come together in a civil discussion of how best we can fund government and make certain that this is what the taxpayers sent us here to do. To understand that we will not spend all of their money, we will not raise their taxes, and that we will transform government so it works more efficiently and more effectively. That's what this EBR does. Legislators, it will be on your desk this afternoon, and we stand by the staff and I to answer any of your questions. Thank you for being here today. God bless you.